Evie, am I calling you Evie Nevin?
If it's okay, I'll stay sitting down because the reason I have the stick is because I have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is actually quite common when it comes to, there's a lot of crossover with autism and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I was adopted, so my adopted family didn't have any information about my biological family, my background, anything like that. So this was the diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, diagnosis of autism was quite surprising. I was diagnosed as autistic when I was 33. I am now almost 36. When I was growing up, I struggled quite a lot. Even from a toddler, you know, I would get overwhelmed and do things like bang my head off the wall. And doctors put it down to the fact that I was deaf in one ear, and they thought it was the frustration of not being able to hear anyone. We know now this was more likely to do with being autistic, and I'm not able to control my emotions and not able to regulate myself. So I struggled in school. I was always deemed highly strung, overly emotional, and when in actual fact, it was autism, and I wasn't being neurotic and overly emotional. When I was about 14, my sister had said it to my parents, I think Evie's autistic. And my mother at the time was worried, my family were worried that if I had that diagnosis, that I would be written off, that people wouldn't give me opportunities. And I have overcome a lot of the things that they were worried about. Not in spite of autism, but because I'm autistic, that I ran for election in 2019. I became chair of employability in West Cork, which helps autistic people get into employment. I'm part of the local access group, and all of these things was because I'm autistic. And there's this kind of misconception sometimes that autistic people lack empathy, and I think we actually feel it a lot more than people realise. The one thing I have found over the years since diagnosis is people saying to me, oh, you must be high functioning, you must be low on the spectrum. And I think people have this conception that the spectrum is linear when it's not. And it kind of diminishes and it kind of belittles the experience of autistic people when people say, oh, you're low on the spectrum or you're high functioning. And girls and women are particularly good at masking, I've found, and people say, oh, I wouldn't have known. And it's years of having to hide who I was because of, oh, geez, Evie's highly strung, she's overly emotional, she'll cry at the drop of a hat. And those kind of, and it really, really affected my self-confidence then. And I was trying to kind of mask and make myself look like a neurotypical person, but had I been accepted as who I was, I think my confidence would have been a lot better as a child. I was really, really down on myself. You know, people often used to say to me that I didn't make eye contact as a child because I was not confident in myself, and now we know it was probably because I'm autistic. The main kind of things I've learned over the years since being diagnosed is people are far more patient now that I have a diagnosis. People are, they're just a lot kinder now that it's almost like, oh, you have an excuse, and it's like, well, no, that's not how it works. The other things, I suppose, in terms of like my children and the children that, like, I'm in Clonakilty, so obviously we have an ASD unit in the Gaelscoil in Clonakilty, which is very good, and we're obviously campaigning as well to have a larger school in West Cork so that we can have children from, you know, from play school age right up through secondary school so that they can continue and there'll be that consistent and routine for these children. But there's a lot of work to be done in that term, and I would hope that government will assist the West Cork Special School Group, who I believe were here, some of them were here this morning for the parents group. They're very, very hardworking people, I really hope that the government will assist him in getting this school. That's such a vital, it'll be so vital for these children and for them not to feel othered, which is something that, you know, happens quite frequently. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evie.